Today's daf is Chulin daf Peites, and we have 5 lines from the bottom of daf Peiches Amid Beis. Zok the Gemara. Amar Rava. Rava said, "B'schar she'amar Avram Avinu v'anoichi offer ve'efer." As a reward for the fact that Avram Avinu said, "V'anoichi offer ve'efer," zachu banav l'shtei mitzvahs. Avram Avinu's einaklach were zeicha to 2 mitzvahs. Efer para, v'afar saita. Meaning, Avram Avinu said, v'anoichi efer. In exchange for that, the Yidden was zeicha to the mitzvah of para aduma, which involves efer. Because Avram Avinu said, v'anoichi afar, the Yidden was zeicha to the mitzvah of afar saita, which involves afar. Fake the Gemara, v'lichshav nami afar kisui adam. We're learning para kisui adam, so we're thinking in terms of kisui adam. So the Gemara asks the obvious question on Rava. Perhaps the reason we have the mitzvah of kisui adam, which is done with afar, is also as a schar for the fact that Avram Avinu said, v'anoichi afar. So the Gemara says, Haslam hechsher mitzvah ika hana leka. Kisui adam is a mitzvah, but that's all it is. It's only a mitzvah, as opposed to the efer of the para aduma and the afar saita. In addition to them being mitzvahs, but there are also fringe benefits ba'olam hazeh that we have from it. The efer para is mitaher someone. If somebody's tummy tumas meis back in the day, the only way to become tar was through the efer of the para aduma. Afar saita was coming to be mater isha l'bayla. If a woman is a suffix zaina, suffix saita, so there's a whole esoteric process that the Torah says you can follow, and assuming the woman comes out tahar, she'll now be mutar l'bayla. So in addition to the efer par and the offer site being mitzvahs, there are also fringe benefits, and that's the schar that Rava was referring to. Rava didn't just mean that because Avram Avinu said v'anoichi offer ve'efer, we got 2 mitzvahs. We have many mitzvahs. Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakas Yisrael leficha chir b'lem Torah mitzvahs. But mitzvahs ordinarily are lavlei hanisitnu. The chiddush was that here you have 2 mitzvahs that we have hana from. We have hana from the efer para, we have hana from the offer saita, and the reason we merited those 2 mitzvahs with its fringe benefits, with its schar, it's because Avram Avinu said v'anoichi afa ve'efer. Similar halacha. Amar Rava said the schar sham Avram Avinu im michut v'atzreich now, because Avram Avinu said im michut v'atzreich now zachu banav l'shtei mitzvahs. The Yidden was zeicha to 2 mitzvahs, the chut shalt cheles u'ritzua shalt tefillin. So when did Avram Avinu say im michut v'atzreich now? It's in Parshas Lech Lecha. The context is after the war between the kings, the 4 kings against the 5 kings. Vayovei Apolit, Avram Avinu hears that his nephew Lot was captured, and as a result, Avram wanted to save Lot, so he got involved in this war, and he ends up saving Lot, additionally saving Melech Stoim. And Melech Stoim was very makir tov to Avram Avinu. So he goes to Avram Avinu and he tells him, "Vayomer Melech Stoim Mel Avram, tein li hanefesh. I want you to give me back the nefashos. I want the slaves. But varuchush kachlach. But you could take everything else." Incidentally, the Chassam Sofer says that Melech Stoim is a mashal to the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara goes over to a Yid and he tells him, "Tein li hanefesh. I want your nefesh. I want your neshama. Varuchush kachlach. I'll give you everything else. All I want is your nefesh." But either way, Vayomer Avram Melech Stoim. So what did Avram Avinu tell Melech Stoim? Hari moisi yadi al Hashem keil el yin koine shemayim varetz. He made a shvua. In michut, I'm not going to take a chut, nor will I take a sroich nal, a shoelace. V'im ekach mikol hashalach v'lo yisoymar, because I don't want you to say ani asharti esavim. Then Avram Avinu said, the only thing I'm not going to give back is beladai rak asher achlo anor. Whatever my chevra already ate, v'chelak ha'noshim asher holchu iti honor eshkel u'mamre hem yiklu chelka. Number one, I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for honor eshkel u'mamre. Additionally, whatever was already consumed, whatever we don't have anymore, that I pasha can't give back. But either way, Melech offers Avram Avinu, he says, "Tein li hanefesh, but varuchush kachlach, you could take the entire ruchush." Avram Avinu says no, and he said, "V'michut, I'm not going to take a chut, v'atzroich nal, or even the smallest thing, I'm not going to take." Either way, Rava said because Avram Avinu said chut and sroich nal, the Yidden was zeicha to mitzvahs that involve a chut and that involve a sroich nal. The chut is referring to the chut shel cheles, and the sroich nal, what's the shoelace? What's the strap? What's the ritzua? It's the ritzua shel tefillin. Says the Gemara. Bishlam ritzua shel tefillin. Bishlam ritzua shel tefillin. I understand the schar. Meaning, we just said a moment ago that when Rava said that Avram Avinu, because he said v'anoichi afa ve'efer, his banav was like the 2 mitzvahs, doesn't just mean mitzvahs. It means mitzvahs that have fringe benefits. It means Efer Paraduma, which is Mitaher. It means Afar of Soita, which is Mater Ishal Abayla. So I understand in that same vein, when Rava said that the Yidden got two mitzvahs, Chut Shel Tcheles and Ritzua Shel Tefillin, that there's fringe benefits in the Ritzua Shel Tefillin. Ksiv, it says, V'ro Kalam Yaretz Kishem Hashem Nikrot Lach V'Tanya, Rebbe Lezer Gadol Loy Me'el Tefillin Shaberosh. That you see through the Tefillin Shaberosh, the Umay Sa'olam have Yira, they're afraid of the Yidden. So there's a benefit that comes along with the mitzvah of Tefillin. In addition to it being a mitzvah, over here, this mitzvah, there's an element of Hana because of this idea. Rebbe Lezer Gadol said that when the Umay Sa'olam see the Tefillin Shaberosh, they're afraid. El Chut Shel Tcheles Mahi. What's this benefit that comes along from the Chut Shel Tcheles? The time learned to the Brayser. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu pick that the tzitzit should have tcheles? Why blue? Maybe some other color. Because the sea is tcheles. V'yam doim l'rekia. And the yam looks like the rakia. Rakia doim l'evan sapir. The rakia looks like sapphire, which is blue. The evan sapir doim l'kisei hakavod. How do you know that the evan sapir is like the kisei hakavod? The chsiv, because the pasuk says, Vayiru es elikei Yisrael, V'sachas raglov kemasei livnas hasapir uke'etzem hashamayim l'tayar. So it says that they saw, the Yidden did, as Elikei Yisrael, v'tachas raglov, underneath the feet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol, they saw Kemaisei Livnas Hasaper. That means the Kisei HaKavod, that's where the Raglav of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are, seems to be sapphire. V'ksivin, there's another pasuk, and this is in Yecheskel Perek Aleph, in the Maisa HaMerkava. The pasuk over there says, Yecheskel looks up, Umimalu Rakia Ashal Rosham Kemari Even Saper, Demus Kisei. It's clear. So the Demus Kisei was Saper. Either way, the reason we picked Tcheles is because Tcheles reminds us of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thus, in addition to there being a mitzvah of Tcheles, there's also this additional benefit of the mitzvah of Tcheles. We'll see a little bit more about this when we speak at some raid a little bit later. Either way, so in the schar that Avraham Avinu said, Vanoichi Afav Efer, we got two mitzvahs that have benefits. Number one, the mitzvah of Efer Para. Number two, the mitzvah of Afar Soita. Efer Para is Mitaher from Tumas Meis. Afar Soita is Mat Yishel Baila. And because Avraham Avinu said, Michut Vatzreich, now we got two mitzvahs with benefits. Because he said Chut, we got the Chut Shal Tcheles, which is Doima Lekisei HaKavod, which is something that brings Li the Yer Shamayim. Again, more about that later. Additionally, because Avraham Avinu said Tzreich, now we got the Ritzur Shel Tefillin, and that's something that imposes Yira on the Umay Sa'olam, as Rebbe Lezer HaGadol said, V'ro Kalam Yaretz Kishem Hashem Nikra Elecha. It's referring to the Tefillin Shaberosh. On this note, if somebody steals and then he eats what he stole, or he spends what he stole, he consumes what he stole, it's very, very terrible, because it's almost impossible to do tshuva. Shenemar, Biladei Rak Asher Achlo Anarim. And the context is that Avraham Avinu didn't want to take from Melech's time, but at the same time, what he had already consumed, he had no way of giving back. So you see that even Avraham Avinu, who B'shum Oifin does not want to take the Rechush of Melech's time, but he says, I have no choice. Biladei Rak Asher Achlo Anarim, that I have to keep, because I have no way of giving it back to you. So you see that once something that you don't want, or you want to return, is no longer here, it becomes very challenging to return it. Thus, Kasha Gezel HaNechel. So Rabbi Yochanan said, I heard from Rabbi Shimon who said that any time you find the Dvar Agada that mentions Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosei Aglili, I say Oznecha Ka'afar Chesres. You should make your ears like a funnel. The point is, listen very, very carefully, because whatever he said, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosei Aglili, B'divrei Agada, is probably true, and as a result, pay very close attention. So it's interesting. We've had a few times with regards to Rabbi Akiva, where the Tanam told Rabbi Akiva, "Malacha etzel agada, klach etzel negan ve'ahalos." That the Znaim L'Torah says that even though halacha Rabbi Akiva mechavere, but that's only when it comes to divrei halacha. But when it comes to divrei agada, then you don't have halacha Rabbi Akiva mechavere. You have to be the Lutzkerov to say something like that. But he said that's the oimik in malacha etzel agada. The Rabbi Akiva's koyach in Torah somehow was less manifest when it came to Divrei Agada than it was when it came to Divrei Agada. So there were people that were stronger in Divrei Halacha, people that were stronger in Divrei Agada. Here it's the opposite. So Rabbi Yochanan said, I heard from Rabbi Shimon about Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosei Aglili. So when it comes to Divrei Agada, listen to everything he says. What did he say? The pasuk says, Hashem says, Hashem turns to the Yidden and he says, I want you to know, the reason I chose you as a nation is not because you're bigger or more plentiful than the other nations of the world. What then? The pasuk continues, Ki atem hama'at mikolam. Now, Pasha, the way you read the pasuk is that Hashem's telling the Yidden that don't think I chose you because there's so many of you. No, ki atem hama'at mikolam. The Jews make up a very small percentage of the world's population. That's the Pasha pshat. But said Rabbi Eliezer, some Rabbi Yisrael, really, there's a tifkeit. You want to know why I chose you? Because you have a midah that I like, and that is that by Jews, even when they achieve greatness, you always know how to act humble. Nasati Gdula Avram, and he gave examples. He said Avram Avinu was a gadol. Omar lefanai, and what did Avram Avinu say? V'noichi afa ve'efer l'Moshe ve'Aharon. Hashem says, I gave gedula to Moshe and Aharon. Omar, what did they say? V'nachnuma. They were humble. They said, what are we? We're garnished. The David, Hashem says, I gave so much gedula to David. And what did David HaMelech say? V'noichi toilas v'loyish. So with all the gedula that Avram Avinu had, that Moshe and Aharon had, that David HaMelech had, what did they say? They said, we're nothing. Anoichi afa ve'efer, v'anachnu ma, v'anoichi teilas, v'lo yish. But when it comes to do Oivdik Yechavim, it's just the opposite. Nasati Gedula, Nimrod. Hashem says, I gave Gedula to Nimrod. Oma, what did Nimrod say as soon as he had a little bit of Gedula? Hava nivnu lanu ir. Let's go build a city. Let's go rebel against Hashem. L'parei, Hashem says, I gave Kovid to, I gave Gedula. Omar, he said, mi Hashem. L'san cheriv, Omar, either way, we the point is that Hashem says that I gave Gedula to the Yidden, and you see they still know how to act humble. That's why I chose them. So said Rabbi Eliezer, Benoisha Rabbi Yossi Aglili. We have to listen to very carefully whenever he says anything in Dvar Agada. He says that now you understand the pasuk in Devarim Perek Zayim. Hashem didn't choose the nation because that is massive nation from a population standpoint. You know why Hashem chose them? Ki ama'at mikol ha'amim. Not because you gotta act humble. And even when you have meirubchem, even when you have gedula, you still know how to be small. And it's for that reason that Hashem says, I chose them. I saw the Chidah, the Sefer Maris Ayin, says that the Mishnah says in Avos, ma'oid ma'oid hevish fal ruach. So with regards to the midah of Anova, it's ma'oid ma'oid hevish fal ruach. So he says, ma'oid is Rosh Tevis, Moshe, Avram, Aharon, and David. Those are the four tzaddikim that the Gemara mentions right here. That even though they had gedula, still they knew how to be ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. That's ma'oid hevish fal ruach. They're the lesson of what humility is supposed to be. It doesn't matter how great you are, how much gedula you have. You're still supposed to know how to act humble. Either way, we mentioned the fact that Avram Avinu said v'anoichi offer ve'efer. Again, why are we talking about Anova? Because the daf started that Rava said v'schash am Avram Avinu v'anoichi offer ve'echer zachu banav l'shtei mitzvahs efer paraduma v'offer soita. And the Gemara asked the kasha, say offer kisei adam, which is the topic. We're learning Perek Kisei Adam. Either way, so we digressed a little bit about the Anova of Avram Avinu. And in this last brisa, we mentioned the fact that Avram Avinu said, V'anoichi ofa ve'efer. And then we mentioned the fact that Moshe and Aharon said, V'anachnu ma. So on that note, says the Gemara, Omar Rava, more Rava. V'itema Rabbi Yochanan. Some say Rabbi Yochanan. Gadol sheba b'Moshe v'Aharon, Yosef Mashanem b'Avram Avinu. The ilu Avram ksiv, it says, V'anoichi ofa ve'efer. Avram Avinu wasn't on enough. What did he say? V'anoichi ofa ve'efer. V'ila b'Moshe v'Aharon ksiv, v'nachnu ma. Pasha, you learn the Gemara that the madrega of ma, v'anachnu ma, is a greater madrega in midas ha'anava than the madrega of v'anoichi off of ve'efer. If you say v'anoichi off of ve'efer, it means at the very least you're off of ve'efer. But as it relates to v'anachnu ma, you're not even off of ve'efer. The bismam is garnished. So Moshe and Aharon said v'anachnu ma. Avram Avinu said v'anoichi off of ve'efer. Thus, gadol shenemar Moshe v'Aharon yoser mimashenemar ba'Avram. But I saw the Lev Aryeh, and it's Yedua, the Welt says it over from B'Yenis and Eibush. It's over the years, I've heard it said over b'shem different tzaddikim. But right here on this Gemara, the Lev Aryeh says it. He's medayik the Lashon HaGemara. Why does it say Gadol shenemar b'Moshe yoser mimashenemar ba'Avram? Shouldn't it have said that Moshe and Aharon were greater anovim than Avram Avinu was? Gadol shenemar, he asks a few other kashas as well. He says a different shine in the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't mean that the madrega of nachnu ma is a greater madrega than v'anoichi off of ve'efer. I mean, we're splitting hairs. What the Gemara means is something else. Avram Avinu was an anav. Where do you find Avram Avinu's midas anava? Avram Avinu said v'anoichi off of ve'efer. What was the context of v'anoichi off of ve'efer? It's a passing of Parshas Vayera. Avraham Avinu is davening to Hashem. He's trying to get Hashem to spear the city of Stoim. And he acknowledges in his tefillah, as he's davening, he tells Hashem, I recognize the fact that I'm really nothing. I'm off of the Efer, but at the same time, I want you to please spare the city of Stoim. Avraham Avinu said, "Vanoichi off of the Efer, Takadosh Baruch Hu." When did Moshe and Aharon say "Vanachnu ma"? It's in Parshas Beshalach. It's in the Parshas Haman. So in the Parshas Haman, Mita'al Skula, so tucked away in that parsha. So the Parshas Haman was predicated with the Yidden complaining, right? The pasuk says, "Vayoloinu." The Yidden, they're in the midbar, and the dust settles, the sea split, and now it's running again. It's Olam Kimin Hagei Hailech, and the Yidden realize they don't have food. So what are we going to do? We're in the midbar, and we're going to be here for a little while. They don't realize at the time it's 40 years, but still we have to eat something. So they go to Moshe and Aharon, they start complaining. So Moshe and Aharon turn to them, and he tells them, he says, why are you complaining to us? V'nachnu ma. We have nothing to do with this. Ki salinu aleinu. You think all the nisim, everything that's been going on has something to do with us? We're just shluchim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're nothing. And then again, the second time, Vayomer Moshe b'teis Hashem v'nachnu ma lo yaleinu tlunai seichem. Ki al Hashem. Why are you channeling your kindness to us? We have nothing to do with this. We're just, right, you don't kill the messenger. We're just shluchim. Says the Levarye, Avraham Avinu said, Vanoichi off of Efer HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe and Aharon said, Vanachnu ma to Klal Yisrael. He says, you find people sometimes, they're anavim, but they're going to be an anav if they're in the presence of somebody greater than them. So they're in the presence of a gadol, they're in the presence maybe of somebody very wealthy. It causes them to have a sense of humility. So when they're in the presence of people that are greater than them, they feel anava. But let's say they're in the presence of someone that they feel greater than, then to the contrary, then already it's a shmekta bissel from gaiva. So says the Levari, the Madrega, Gadol, Shenemar, the Moshe Aaron, Yosef Hashem Avram. No one's saying that Moshe and Aaron were greater on Novim than Avram. That's not the point. The point is that Moshe and Aaron's Midas Anova was manifest even to Klal Yisrael that were on a lesser Madrega than them. As opposed to Avram Avinu, who said, Vanoichi off of Eifet HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who of course is much greater than Avram Avinu. As a result, the Madrega of Anova, the type of Anova that you see by Moshe Rabbeinu, that's the punchline of the Gemara. That's greater than the type. It's not the Vanachnu ma versus the off of Efer. It's the context of what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying Vanachnu ma versus the context of Avram Avinu when he said Vanoichi off of Efer. More agada about Anav. The world stands because of Moshe and Aharon. It says Vanachnu ma. V'ksiv hasam, and it says Toila Eretz al Blimos. That's of Yamunei Ram fame. Toila Eretz al Blima. Toila Eretz, Hashem is Toila the Eretz. He suspends the world al Blima. The way you read it is Blima. So who said Vanachnu ma? There we're nothing. We're not even ma. That was Moshe and Aharon. Thus, Amar Rabbi, Yitem Rabbi Yochanan, Ein Olam Miskayim, Ela B'Shvil Moshe Van. Amar Rabbi Lo, Ein Olam Miskayim, Ela B'Shvil Misha B'Elam Atzah B'Shas Meriva. The world stands because of people that know how to keep their mouth closed during a fight, so they don't have to have the last word. Shenemar Toila Eretz Al Belima. Belima meaning you need to be bolum, you need to be quiet. The world stands on someone that is an anav. Shenemar learns it from a different pasuk, not Toila Eretz Al Belima, but rather umitachas zroyos olam. Someone that's mitachas. Someone that's on the bottom, someone that lets people trample on him, that's what keeps the world. A person in this world is supposed to make himself like an Elam. Meaning he shouldn't talk, he should be an Anav, he doesn't have to have the last word. You would think that for Divrei Torah, it's supposed to be the same way. No, when it comes to Torah, then Tidaberim, then don't be an Elam. Someone who learns a lot of Torah should be about Gaiva. So the Gemara is now going to return to its regular program, which is the halachas of Kisi Adam for a few lines, then we'll finish the parak, and then we'll go back and speak out some raid. So Rabbi said, you're allowed to do Kisi Adam with the offer of an Ira and Hidachas. So say you have a city that's an Ira and Hidachas, and you shech the Chayin and Oif, you have a mitzvah of Kisi Adam. So could you use the offer of the Ira and Hidachas for the mitzvah of Kisi Adam? So the answer is yeah. The Gemara, isn't the offer of the Ira and Idachas asabana? So if it's asabana, how could you be Mekayim a mitzvah with it? If you're being Mekayim a mitzvah with the offer, then you're having hana from the offer. If you're having hana from the offer, then that's a problem. The Iri Nidachas is also bano. The Iri says said it doesn't mean the offer that was already detached from the Iri Nidachas, but it means offer that's attached to the ground, and any part of the Iri Nidachas that's physically attached to the ground is not also bano. It's not included in the Shulchan Aruch of Iri Nidachas. How do you know that the Chsiv has kol shlala tikboitz el toich rechayva v'sarafta? We learn from there Misha in Mechusar el kvitza v'sreifa. The only part of the Iri Nidachas that you're obligated to burn is the parts that all you need to do is gather, and then you'll be able to burn it. But anything that's attached to the ground, in order for you to be mekayim that's kol shlola tikboitz, you first have to do a tlisha. So if it's mechusar tlisha, kvitza, and streifa, it's not included. The point is, the Iri said a chiddush. He said that the only time it's okay to use the offer of the Ira Nidachas for Kisui Adam is if it's the offer that's not asavano, it's the offer that's attached to the ground. But enochinami, if you would have offer that's already detached from the ground, being that it's offer Nidachas, it's asavano, you can't have hana. How can you be mekayim the mitzvah of Kisui Adam? When you mekayim the mitzvah of Kisui Adam, you're having hana. Thus, the offer of a Ira Nidachas that's detached would be asabano. It's only the offer that's attached that would be okay. Rava, but what does Rava say? No, the whole question is a mistake. What's the kash? How could you do Kisui Adam with offer Ira Nidachas? When you do the mitzvah, aren't you having hana? Says Rava, no. This is Talmud Bavli 101. Mitzvah slavli hanis nitnu. We know that even though, of course, a person has hana when he does a mitzvah, but in the lumbus, from a halachic standpoint, the hanas mitzvah that you have is never considered anah. So, for example, if somebody makes a neder that he won't have anah from somebody, that person could be mitzvah with kiyah shayfer, etc. What do you mean? He's being mahana him. He made a neder that he won't have anah from the person. The answer is because hana of mitzvah, for whatever reason, is not considered anah. So Rava said that what the Tana meant, Rab Zira, Vitem Rab Yirmiyah meant, when they said Mechasib offer Ira Nidachas, was all offer Ira Nidachas. Even the offer Ira Nidachas that is asabana. If it's asabana, how could you do a mitzvah? What's the kashan? Because when you're doing a mitzvah, you haven't got enough. Mitzvah slav lahanistan. No, it's not considered anos. It sounds like a machlokes Ziri and Rava. Whether we say mitzvah slav lahanistan or mitzvah lehanistan. Rava says clearly mitzvah slav lahanistan. Ziri, from the way that he explained, Rab Zera, Vitem Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah's halacha seems to hold mitzvahs lehanis, and he had to be miyashev that when we say you could do kisei adam with the offer in Aridachas, it means dafka the offer that's not asabana. Either way, the Gemara is going to be mafalful a little bit with regards to mitzvahs lav lehanis. Yosef Rabino of a couple of hashmaita. It's Rabbi Chumi the Rabino. Rabbi Chumi asked Rabino, "Shofar shavayis kechavim la yitkabai." The Brisa says you're not allowed to blow shofar if the shofar was used for avodah zara. My lav im takalayatza. Not only can you not use it, does the Brisa not mean that if you use it, you're not going to be Yoitza? Now, why would you not be Yoitza? Probably because you're not allowed to have Hana. But if you're going to tell me mitzvah slav lehanis, who cares that it's avodah zara? Who cares that you can't have Hana from avodah zara? I'm not having Hana. What do you mean? You're being Mekayim mitzvahs tkiyah shayfer? Yeah, that's true, but mitzvah slav lehanis, no. So isn't this Brisa a raya that you don't say mitzvah slav lehanis? No, the Gemara says in taka yatza. It doesn't say in taka yatza. You're saying my love. I disagree. It's not true. Being that mitzvah slav lehanis, no, the katchila don't use a shayfer shel avodah zara. I mean that seems self-evident. But b'di'evid, if you do, it's going to be okay. Another kasha lulav shel avodah zara l'yito. You're not supposed to use a lulav shel avodah zara. My love and not yatza. You're not yoytz if you use it presumably because it's also about no mitzvahs. You see, you're not. It's considered hana. The Gemara says, "Loi in natal yatza." Vatanya fake the Gemara. I hear. Problem is, I have two prices. Number one, taka lo yatza, natal lo yatza. So this is checkmate. Here you have a mefurish price, not my love. Here it's mefurish in the price. So that if you blow with a shayfer shel avodah zara or you use a lulav shel avodah zara, the halacha is lo yatza. How does this shtim with Rava's halacha mitzvahs lav lahanis nindo? I'm Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi said it's for a completely different reason. Hachi hashta hasam sheyura be'inon. The reason you can't be yoitza with a shayfer shel avodah zara or with a lulav shel avodah zara is not because of the iser hana. The hana is not an issue because mitzvah slav lahanis. You're not violating the iser to have hana from avodah zara when you do a mitzvah with avodah zara. The reason is something else because being that avodah zara is asab hana, you need to destroy the avodah zara. That's what the Torah says. You're supposed to destroy avodah zara. The rule is that anything that has a din that it needs to be destroyed, halacha looks at it as if it's already destroyed. It's what's known as kituti mechta sheyure. Being that we look at it as already destroyed, even though it's physically here, it doesn't have the chashivas of shir. So, being that lulav, says Rashi, there's a shir of how big a lulav has to be. And there's a shir of what a shofar needs to be. And here it's avodah zarah. Thus, k'tus mechtes shiurei. So it doesn't have a shir. The reason you're not yoitz is not because you're violating an isser hana. The reason you're not yoitz is you simply don't have a shir. If that's the case, why don't you say k'tus mechtes shiurei with regards to offer ira nidachas? Right? Rava said that when the member was said over that you're allowed to do kisi adam with offer ira nidachas, it means all offer ira nidachas. He said mitzvahs navlahanis in it, but there's another issue. What happened to k'tus mechtes shiurei? So the Gemara says, there's no shear of how big or small the offer needs to be when you do kisi adam. It's cute the way the Gemara says it. If anything, it's kol ma'ademechtes ma'il l'chsuye. Right, when you're doing kisi adam, what are you doing? You're crushing the offer. Oh, kedusei mechtes yurei, it's even better. It's not a chisarin, it's actually a maila. The bottom line is, we finished Perek kisi adam with a lot of lumdus, with the halachas of avodah zarah, kedusei mechtes yurei, mitzvahs lavli hanis nitnu, but we'll take advantage of the fact that it was a light daf with some divrei agada. So before we say Hadron and start the next Perek Gid Anosha, which is from the most festive prakim in Shas, just a little bit of raid as it relates to today's daf. So the daf began with Rava's memory. Why are we bringing this in Perek Kisi Adam? Because the Gemara has the kasha. The Gemara said, why are you only mentioning Efer Para and Offer Saita? Maybe we got Offer Kisei Adam also as a schar for the fact that Avram Avinu said Vanoichi offer ve'efer. So the Gemara says no. The point that Rava was trying to make is that because of what Avram Avinu said, we got mitzvahs shematan schara betzida that have some sort of benefit that we have. Efer paraduma is mitar from Tumas Meis. Offer soita is shalom bayis. It's matter ishal abayla. Offer kisei adam is just a mitzvah, and as a result, it's not what Rava was referring to when he said beschar. Schar meaning something that we have b'hai almo, something that we could benefit right now. And then the Gemara mentioned another member that Rava said. Another two mitzvahs that are a schar ba'olam hazeh that Rava said we got because of something that Avram Avinu said. Eschar sham Avram Avinu im michut va'atzreich now zachu banav l'shtei mitzvahs. What were the two mitzvahs? L'chut shel tcheles u'leretzua shel tefillin. The Gemara said, what's the schar of the chut shel tcheles and retzua shel tefillin? Chut shel tcheles is because tcheles doim liyam, yam doim l'rekia. It's doim l'kisei hakavod. So from tcheles you somehow leap to kisei hakavod. As it relates to the retzua shel tefillin, it's because the pasuk says v'ro kalami arts kishem Hashem nikra lecha v'yaru mimeka. And what's the kishem Hashem nikra lecha? That's the tefillin shabarosh. You see that if a person wears tefillin properly, right? There's a famous story with the Vilna Gaon that somebody was chapping with the Gaon and he walked outside with a tefillin shabarosh and the person ran away. It was v'ro kalami arts kishem Hashem nikra lecha v'yaru mimeka. So that's a matan schara b'tzida, so to speak. Thus, you have the Efer Para, the Offer Saita, the Chut Shel Tcheles, and the Ritzua Shel Tefillin. So a few areas. Number one, Chut Shel Tcheles. What's the matan schara? Because tcheles is doimel l'kisei hakavod. Now, Pashut, the way you learn this Gemara is that when a person looks at his tzitzis, he sees his tcheles, it's going to bring him lidei yiras shamayim. That's for sure the Pashut pshat in this Gemara. In fact, the pasuk says, "Uri'isa moiso yuschartem eskol mitzvahs Hashem v'lo yisasura achri levavchem v'achri einechem v'kidu the sefarno on Parsha Shlach in the Parsha of Tzitzis says that it's a hemshach. It's Uri'isa moiso yuschartem eskol mitzvahs Hashem v'asisa moiso. You're going to look at your tefillin, you're going to remember the mitzvahs Hashem, and it's going to bring you, it's a skula, to v'lo yisasura achri levavchem v'achri einechem. So the point is that there's a shmira, there's a certain element of yiras shamayim that a person gets when he looks at his tefillin. When he looks at his tzitzis, what's the yiras shamayim? How do you connect tzitzis to yiras shamayim? So this Gemara, because tcheles is doimel liyam, which is doimel l'kisei hakavod. So if a person looks at his tzitzis properly, what he's supposed to see, if he's wearing tcheles, what he's supposed to see is he's supposed to see the kisei hakavod, which is going to bring him to uschartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem. It's going to bring him to vasisa moisam. It's going to bring him to v'lo yisasuru achri levavchem ve'achri einechem. This is the greatest school of all time. So as a result, it makes perfect sense what Rava said, B'schar sha'ama Avram Avinu michut v'atzreich now, that the chut shel tcheles brings you to a tremendous one. The truth is, it's a Mefurish Gemara. It's a Gemara Masechtas Menachos, Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, right? The Gemara over there says, Amr Rav Nosson, ein lecha kol mitzvah kalek Says, the mitzvah sitzes. The Gemara tells a story. There was a person who went lekraki ayam, and he was about to be mezana with a zoyna, and he climbed up a bunch of beds, and then he started taking his sitzes off, and it hit him, and it knocked him down, and it ended up spearing him from doing the mitzvah. And the Gemara says, you see from there that the tzitzis saved him. And the Karanoira on this Gemara tells through this pasuk. He says, "V'lo yisasura achrei levavchem v'achrei nechem" came about through the tzitzis, because that's the way you read the pasuk. Urisa moisa, that leads to v'lo yisasuru achrei levavchem v'achrei nechem. So l'chayra, you would think that Rashi, when he was mefarish the Gemara, would have said something me'ain, more bekitzer, but an abridged version of what we said. But if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says something else, and it's kedai to see Rashi inside. So Rashi dibra maskil she'atchelas doim l'yam. Number one, Rashi says she'achilazim min hayamhu. Number one, what's tchelas? Tchelas comes from the chilazim. The Chilazim lives at sea, oila achas l'shivim shana, and it emerges once every 70 years. Umaris doime liyam, and its blood is similar to the yam. It sounds like its blood is blue. So Rashi mentions some of the simanim of the chilazim, which of course was very important in the controversy of tchelas. We spoke about this in length when we learned Masechtas Menachos, hashtag Muris Trunculus, etc., etc. Either way, Rashi continues, after Rashi gives some of the simanim, right? There's different simanim of the chilazim that Rashi throws around throughout Shas. But Rashi continues, and he says, V'yam onu royin sh'daim l'rekia, rekia saper, v'saper l'kisei hakavod, d'chsiv v'tachas rag l'maseh livas hasaper, v'ketzim hashmayim almo, shemiyam doim l'saper, v'saper l'kisei hakavod, d'chsiv kamari even saper d'muskisei. Okay, what's the punchline? So Rashi, when a Kadosh Baruch Hu looks at the Kisei HaKavod, niskar b'mitzvah zu, he remembers this mitzvah, she keneged kol mitzvahs. Unbelievable. Rashi says that the skula of tchelas doim l'yam is not that when you look at your tchelas, you're going to think of the kisei. It has nothing to do with the Risa Moisa Yuschartem as Kol Mitzvahs Hashem v'lo yisasura achrei levavchem v'achrei nechem. It's mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at his kisei HaKavod, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't wear tchelas. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at the kisei HaKavod, niskar b'mitzvah zu, he remembers the mitzvah. She keneged kol mitzvahs. He remembers the fact that tzitzis is shakel keneged kol mitzvahs, gematria, etc. He remembers that it's shakal keneged kol mitzvahs, and the schira, the fringe benefit, is not what we get as a result of looking at it, but it's what we get as a result of HaKadosh Baruch Hu looking at it. I think the nafkamina is today, where a lot of Yidden don't wear tchelas, right? So some Yidden wear tchelas, but there are many that don't wear tchelas. V'advarim atikin. So for someone that doesn't wear tchelas, so he doesn't have the Urisa Moisa Yuschartem as Kol Mitzvahs Hashem from the standpoint of tchelas doim l'yam. So if the skula is that when he looks at his tchelas, it's doim l'yam, so if you're not wearing tchelas, you don't have it. But if the is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at the Kisei HaKavod and the manzich the tchelas, which reminds him of the tzitzis, it could be that's something, even though there are Yidden that are not wearing tchelas, but at the end of the day, the skula is mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The skula is not why Rashi was mefarish the Gemara like this and wasn't mefarish the Gemara Kapshutai, I think is a little bit of a mystery. Either way, that's the first order. The second order is, so the Gemara mentioned that because Avraham Avinu said chut, we were zoicha to the mitzvah of tchelas. Because Avraham Avinu said sroich now, we were zoicha to the mitzvah of tefillin. It's yadua that when everyone knows the halach in Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down in Orach Chaim Siman Beis, one of the first halachas in Shulchan Aruch. That is when a person puts on his shoes in the morning. So you're supposed to first put on your right shoe, then you put on your left shoe. If you have laces, you first tie the laces of your left shoe, and then you tie the laces of your right shoe. So you put your right shoe on first, but you tie your left shoe first. The question is why? The truth is, it's a Gemara. It's a Gemara Masechtas Shabbos, Daf Samech Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Ketfilin kach menalin. Shoes are governed by the same laws that govern tefillin. Mat tefillin b'smoil. Just like you put tefillin on your left hand, most people are righties, thus they put it on their yad keya, yodcha, yad keya, you put it on your left hand, afmenalim b'smoil. So too, when it comes to your shoes, it's supposed to be the left shoe first. Right, the Gemara, is that true? Gemara asks from a brisa. The brisa says, mefurish, that kishunoya, when you put your shoes on, you're supposed to put your right shoe on first, and the Gemara comes out, l'maskana, that a yoreh shemayim should be yoytzi yedei. Now, you can do both. How do you do both? Either put your right foot on first, or you put your left on first. When it comes to putting the shoe on, you first put on your right shoe. When it comes to tying, that That's what Rabbi Yochanan meant when he said Ketfilin Kach Menalim. You're supposed to tie your left shoe first. Taisus brings from the Riva that if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Because what are we saying? That just like tefillin left, so too shoes left. What's the shaykhis between shoes and tefillin? Oh, the shaykhis is tefillin, it's ritzuos. You tie it on your hand. Oh, so it's the tying of the shoe that's doima to the kshira of the tefillin, and it's as a result, that's what, so the brisa that says you're supposed to put your right shoe on first, that means when you're getting dressed, the right has a chashivus, thus you put your right shoe on first. But at the same time, there's an idea of tefillin kach menalim, thus when it comes to tying it, daika, ukshartem, that's why you're supposed to first tie your left shoe, and then afterwards you're supposed to tie your right shoe. Kiveger, in the Zagoyis and Shulchan Aruch says as follows, on this halacha, it's in Erechaim, Simin Beis, Sivkotan Dalid, Ro'isi B'Sefer Emek HaMelech, Parshas Lech Lecha Tam L'Shvach. A nice reason why you're supposed to tie your left shoe first, because shoes are like tefillin, which at first glance is Sisri Torah. What do shoes and tefillin have to do with each other? Alpi ma'adam chazal chulin da pei tes. B'schai shal ma'avram avinu imi chut v'atzreich now zochu banu v'beis mitzvos chut shel tcheles uritzuei shel tefillin mishum hachi. It's for that reason kiven du zachu l'tefillin neged she'am atzreich now. Being that we were zeicha to the mitzvah of tefillin because Avram Avinu said atzreich now, nitin chashivus l'sreich now. So now there's a chashivus of tzroich now, it's somewhat related to tefillin likshar tchila b'smoil shekoshim by tefillin. So it says Rab Kiva, at first glance doesn't make any sense. What shaykhis does tefillin have to do with shoes? But he says he found in the Sefer Emek HaMelech, I don't know what that is, Parshas Lech Lecha Atam L'Shvach, a beautiful pshat based on this Gemara. The Gemara says we was zeicha to the ritzuah shel tefillin because Avraham Avinu said tzroich now. So you see tefillin kach menalim, there's a connection. Thus, just like tefillin, it's on the Yad Keya, it's on the left hand. So too, when it comes to tying your shoelaces, you're supposed to tie the shoelaces of your left shoe first. Mei Simcha, in his Meshech Chachmas, he has a whole arichos on this pasuk in Michut Vatzreich Now. He starts off, he brings a Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash says, in Michut Vatzreich Now, Chayecha she'ani noisim levanecha mitzvahs yivamas. We're talking about all the different mitzvahs. B'schar Shalom Avinu, Vanoichi Aviv Efer, B'schar Shalom Avram Avinu, and Michut Vatzreich Now. So we had Efer Paraduma, we had Ofer Soita, we had the Chut Cheles, we had the Tzur Shal Tefillin. Medrash says another thing. It says that because Avram Avinu said Vatzreich Now, the Yidden was zoicha to the mitzvah of Chalitza. K'mo da'at amrit v'cholza na'aloi. Meir Simcha says that he thinks that this medrash, which is tucked away in Parshas Lech Lecha, is a makar. He thinks this is a makar to a Yerushalmi that the Rosh says is Sarchin Gadol. The Yerushalmi says Iker Chalitza he hatoras haritzuos. If anybody ever saw a chalitza, it's a shoe. It's a very specific shoe that's used, and there's a lot of ritzuos that the shoe has. The Yerushalmi says Iker Chalitza. The Iker of the Chalitza is Ataritz Ritzuos. The Rosh brings this, and the Rosh, he says Sarchin Gadol. He says he doesn't know how you could say that, and he asks a festa kasha. He says Chalitza is Teresh B'Ksav. It's not all Teresh B'Al Lach and Moshe Misinai. It's in the end of Parshas Kisei. The Torah talks. It's pretty wordy about how Chalitza is supposed to go down, and it doesn't mention anything about Ritzuos. It doesn't say the word. It says shoes, but it doesn't say anything about Ritzuos. So, Freik the Rosh, how could the Yerushalmi say that the Iker Chalitza Zataras are Ritzuos? If that's the case, Iker is Chasam and HaSefer. Literally. This is the Iker, that's the Lashon Yerushalmi. We have a Sefer Torah that mentions all the halachas of Chalitza. It doesn't say anything about the Ritzuos. So, Freik the Rosh, it's Iker Chasam and HaSefer. Shouldn't you have to have a remes somewhere in the Torah Shabbat for such halacha? Says Ramei Simcha, it's this pasuk right here. Because you see that because of Sroich now, we was zoichet in a mitzvah of tefillin. What's Sroich now? It's not a shoe. It's a shoelace. So you see, they have to be ritzuos. They have to be laces. They have to be straps. So Zokra Mei Simcha, he thinks this is the terrace to the Rosh's kasha, that it's the Iker pasuk that is the reason why we was zoicha to the mitzvah of chalitza. That was miramis to us the ikar of the mitzvah's chalitza. The ikar of the chalitza is ataras mitzuis. You're right, it's not a parshas kiseitze, but it's earlier. It's a parshas lech lecha, which is the pasuk that actually mentions the reason we was zeicha to the mitzvah of chalitza. That Yerushalmi is going like this medrash, that because of sreich now we was zeicha to the mitzvah of chalitza. But then he brings the Gemara Masechtas Chulin, that the Gemara says because of sreich now we was zeicha to the mitzvah of tefillin, and he says that it could be the yitachen, that it's for that reason that we were the time that we put on the tefillin, we don't wear tefillin the whole day. Once upon a time, people wore tefillin the whole day. Today, we don't wear tefillin the whole day. When do you wear tefillin? By shachris. Why shachris? Why not mincha? Okay, Ma'ariv is Laila's not Zman Tefillin, but like Mechatesi Shachris, maybe it should be Mincha. He says, because who was Mesakin Shachris? Avram Avinu. And why were we Zoicha to the mitzvah Ritzuy Shel Tefillin? It's because of what Avram Avinu said. So he says, being that Avram Avinu was Mesake, mitzvah, Tefillah Shachris, and we were Zoicha to the Ritzuy Shel Tefillin because of what Avram Avinu said when he said Michut v'ad Sroich Nal. It's for that reason it's Yitochen shebetfillah Shachris she'Avram Avinu tikno kol Yisrael meluvashim betfillin v'talis gadol mishum zeh. That's the time to go ahead and wear tefillin. That's the second hara. The third hara is something that I heard yesterday from Reb Menachem Zupnik. So he spoke Barab and he said over something very nice, and I just want to be marchiv on that for a minute. So we're learning a whole Amid Gemara where the Gemara talks about the Midas Ha'anava. So usually when you think of sugyas that deal with gaiva and anava, so the first amid that should come to mind is Soita Daf Hey. The Gemara talks about richas, about all the different ein aniva hu yichayim ladu b'madarecha, and then gaiva. You're allowed to have a little bit of gaiva, shmina shebeshminas, right? The Kotzker used to say, heit mekenish azoy get mestin, but the shmina shebeshminas you're allowed to have it. But we get off sometimes with the measurements. But olay minava, olay miktsasa, right? All the Gemaras that talk about gaiva, the gaiva sugyas are in Soita Daf Hey. The anivas sukkis are Chulin daf beitas. But either way, so we're talking about different madregas. The madrega of noichi off of ve'efer, the madrega of va'anachnu ma. But at the same time, the Kotzker Rebbe used to say that every yid has to have two pockets. In one pocket, he has to have the memra of noichi off of ve'efer, but the other one he has to remember b'shvili nivra olam. So the truth is that even though we're talking about a person having the sense that I'm a nothing, it's a little bit of a dangerous mindset, because the truth is that a person can't become an unav to the point where he loses self-confidence, that he starts to think that he's really worthless. To the contrary, a person has to acknowledge who he is and the potential that he has, and he has to remember that although he should act with humility, but at the same time, in a deep place, he has to have a sense of B'shvili Nivra Olam, and he can accomplish whatever he sets his mind out to accomplish. So, yesterday was Parshas Kisisa, and we spoke about the Machzas HaShekel. Rabbi Zupnik said over that everyone knows that when the Yidden were counted, they had to contribute a Machzas HaShekel. You're not supposed to count Jews. So what did we do? Everyone gave a Machzas HaShekel. The kash is, why Machzas HaShekel? Why not a complete shekel? So it's the Alshich, and others say as well that the Yisoid is that it's coming to teach a person that he's only a Machzas, that don't think that you're a full, complete item on your own. No, you're only a machzas. Klal Yisrael together as a nation, that's what we have a chashivos. And this is the lesson. The lesson is that every single person is a fraction. You're only one piece of the puzzle. Every person is a machzas. No person is a complete entity on for its own. So he said that if you think about it, that's a great lesson for the Yasher. Right? The Torah says ha'asher lo yarba. So for the Asher, ha'asher lo yarba, you would think, what do you mean? The chashayni yid, I'm a gevir. Oh, so lo yarba. You're only a machzas. It's very nice you have money, but you're a machzas. As a result, ha'asher lo yarbim. What about the Dal? I mean, the Dal wakes up in the morning, he doesn't think he's more than a machzas. So where's the lesson? What's the tiefkeit of that vart that's said over and over and over again? That the reason it's a machzas hashekel is to remind you that all you represent is a machzas. Is what we tell you is don't give more than a half. That's good for the usher who would have thought that maybe I'm more. He wants to be marba. I want to give a whole shekel, so we tell him lo yarba. What about the dal? The dal is fakert. It's a dal lo yamit. The dal wants to give less. So where does that lesson play itself out? So he said Gavaldi. You know what the lesson to the dal is? Is that you're also a machzas. Because the Dal might think that maybe I'm not even a machzis. What am I? That's the point. The point is, the Asher we tell, you're not more than a machzis. Ha-Asher lo yarba. And the Dal we tell, you're not less than a machzis. You're a machzis. The Rambam says that when the Dal gives his machzah shekel, he can't give it in installments, right? He can't give a quarter of a shekel, then he'll give another few agurot. No. Exactly. You have to give it in one shot. That's why you have to do it. Why do you have to give it in one shot? Because we're telling him, you're the same machzis as the old. We're all machzis. The message is v'anoichi off of efer. You're not more than a machzis. But for the Dal, you know what his machzis is? His machzis is the b'shvili nivra olam, that don't think that you're less than that. But at the same same time, you have to remember, Hadal lo yamid. You're Rav Tzadok HaKohen in his Tzidkas, Rav Tzadok HaKohen in his Tzidkas HaTzadik. It's Ois Kuf Nun Daled. Says a Dover Nifli. It says, Kishem shetzarech Adam lahamid b'Hashem Yisbarach. Listen to this. Just like a person has to believe in Hashem, I mean, that's the most fundamental, basic mitzvah in the Torah. You have to believe in Hashem. And without that, you can't get started, right? So Kishem, this is like a Kishem. Kishem shetzarech Adam lahamid b'Hashem Yisbarach. Kach tzarech achar kach lahamid ba'atzmai. There's a chayvas ha'amuna that a person has to believe in himself as well. What does that mean? Ratzoloi ma sheyesh l'Hashem yisbarach esek imay v'she'einenu poyel botol she'ben laila etc. Ukechaysei sada. He's not a poyel botol. He's not a chaya shelacham yisasam nevdu ve'enam. Rach tzarech lahamin ki nafsha mimekar chayim yisbarach shmoi v'Hashem yisbarach misaneg umishtashei abba kisha'oisis ritzaynoi. And he has to acknowledge and he has to realize that any time he does the Ratzon Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a tremendous timing from what it is he's doing. V'zeu pirish, says Rav Tzadok HaKohen. He says that's what the pasuk means. Vayaminu b'Hashem uveMoshe avdoi. What does that mean? Pirish. What does it mean? Moshe avdoi. So he says we know that the Sfarim HaKadoshim say that Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was made up of all the neshamas of Klal Yisrael. Moshe was shakul keneged shishim riboy, the 600,000 Jews, and every single yid's neshama had a nitzutz of it that was in Moshe Rabbeinu. So you know what the pasuk says? Vayaminu b'Hashem uva Moshe avdai. First it was Vayaminu b'Hashem. That's number one. But after that, they also believed in Moshe. What it means is they believed in themselves. That was the second thing they believed. They believed that they had value. They believed that they had chashivos. And that's the Vayaminu b'Hashem uva Moshe. Not they believed in Moshe. They believed in themselves. That all the Nesha, every single yid, they realized that there's no yid in the world that wasn't put on this world for a tachlis. And every single yid has an ability to contribute in a certain way, and every single yid is chayiv to say b'shvili nivra olam. Everybody, doesn't matter who you are. So you could be the seemingly el yoinim, or you could be from the seemingly tachtoinim. At the end of the day, every single person. The point is that we're learning the sugi over here of Avram Avinu said v'anoichi of Efer, and Moshe and Aharon said v'nachnu ma. There's an idea of loy mirubchem ki ma'atas, but that's all true. But at the same time, it shouldn't come at the expense of a person starting to feel like he's taka of Efer, he's taka v'nachnu ma. There's an idea of ashalo yarba, but at the same time, there's also an idea of adalo yimatmet. You have to balance and realize b'shvili nivra olam ve'yaminu b'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdoi. A person has to kishem. It's amazing. Kishem shetzarech. Just like a person has to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so too he has to believe in himself. And on that note, hadrun aloch kisoy ha'adam. So we now turn our attention to the 7th parak of Masechtas Chulin, Perek Gid Anosha. So the truth is, Perek Gid Anosha requires an introduction. We'll save that for tomorrow, but for now we'll jump right in. So the Gid Anosha, loosely translated, is the sciatic nerve. It's a part of the animal that the Torah says you're not allowed to eat. It's the third mitzvah in the Torah, Leminyan ha-mitzvahs of the Sefer HaChinuch, mitzvahs Peri V'Rivya, mitzvahs Mila, Shloi Lechel Gid Anosh. That's the third mitzvah. It's mentioned in Parshas Vayishlach. The reason we're not allowed to eat the Gid Hanosha is because when Yaakov Avinu was fighting with Malach Shel Sari Shel Esav, he hit him in his hip, dislocated Yaakov Avinu's hip. We'll see a little bit more what that means. The point is Yaakov was hitting that area in the sciatic nerve. Al Kain, Lo Yoichlu B'nei Yisrael. That's why the Torah says that Yidden are not allowed to eat from the Gid Hanosha. Regardless, there's a lot of interesting halach as it relates to the Gid Hanosha. It's for that reason that there's a lot of just parts of the animal that we completely get rid of because of the complicated aspect of doing what's called nikor, which is the malacha of removing the Gid Hanosha. Some kreisen, they do eat those parts in the animal, hashtag filet mignon, but either way, for now, Gid Hanosha, Gid Hanosha, the mitzvah, the loisaseh of thou shalt not eat the Gid Hanosha is noyig in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. It's not one of the mitzvahs atluyas baretz. B'fnei abayis, v'shaloi b'fnei abayis. You have it nowadays as well. B'chulin, it relates to Chulin u'b'muktashim. It relates to hektish as well. V'noyig b'behema u'b'chaya. It's noyig by behema b'chaya. B'yerech shel yamin u'b'yerech shel smal. Doesn't matter if it's the right thigh or the left thigh. V'einoy noyeg ba'oif v'pnei she'ein lo kaf. Oif just simply doesn't have a kaf. Thus, it's missing some of the technical criteria for there to be an Isser Gid Hanasha. V'noyig b'shlil. Additionally, if you shechta an animal and you find a live fetus inside this animal, also known as a ben pekua, so that shlil, that fetus, is going to have an Isser Gid Hanasha. Yehuda says, Ein noyig b'shlil. The chel by mutter, the chelev of a shlil, we mentioned the shlil, so on the topic of a shlil, the chelev of the shlil is mutter. Ve'ena tabachim ne'manam al Gid Hanasha, Divrei Rameir says that a butcher is not believed to say that he removed the Gid Hanasha. We're going to see it's very complicated. The chachamim and the chachamim say they are believed. Just like they're believed to say they removed the chelev, so why shouldn't they be believed to say that they removed the Gid Hanasha? Either way, the Mishnah said Gid Hanasha is noyeg ba'aretz u'b'chutz la'aretz b'fnei abayis v'shloi b'fnei abayis b'chulin u'b'mukdashim. Fake the Gemara, mukdashim pshita. What's the chiddush that Gid Hanasha is noyeg by hektish? Mishum da hektish ebogli is a good minay. Animal presumably was chulin before it was hektish. So if you have an animal that's chulin, there's an Isser Gid Hanasha. Now you went ahead and you were makdish this animal. So what happens to the Isser Gid Hanasha? Where did it go that you need a Mishnah to tell me that even though it's hektish, there's still going to be an Isser Gid Hanasha? V'chitem, you're going to tell me. Maybe the chiddush is like this: that yesh begidin b'noisim tam. We're going to see a very important machloikis in the sugis of Gid Hanasha. We're starting to get into basa v'chol of taruvas here. So one of the more important machloikis in Perek Gid Hanasha is yesh begidin b'noisim tam or ein begidin b'noisim tam. There's a sheet in the Gemara that holds that if really the Gid Hanasha has no taste. It doesn't have taste from a halachic standpoint. And as a result, really it shouldn't even be aser. It's ke'etz ba'alma. Now, of course, it's aser. The Torah says you're not allowed to eat it. So whether it is noisen tam or it's not noisen tam has zero ramifications as it relates to the etzem isser of Gid Hanasha. The Torah says you can't eat it, whether it's nice and tam or it's ke'et, it doesn't matter. It has nafkaminas in other areas in halach. For example, let's say you cook the Gid Hanasha together with a piece of meat, and it's in a pot, and you don't have shishim of heter keneged the Gid Hanasha. Do you say the whole taruvos is asa now because the Gid Hanasha was maflit tam into the davar shel heter, or not? If yesh begid b'noisen tam, then it was maflit. If ein begid b'noisen tam, it's not going to be maflit. Either way, the Gemara says l'chura another nafkamina would be if you hold yesh begid b'noisen tam. If you're makdish an animal, the iser hektish, iser Me'ila, etc. All these surei achila that relate to hektish would apply to the Gid Hanasha as well. Because if the Gid Hanasha is nice and tam, it's food. It's not an eitz ba'alma, where the Torah happened to say a chiddush that even though it's eitz ba'alma, still the third mitzvah in the Torah don't eat Gid Hanasha. It's regular food. You would have this hektish. If you don't aim begid b'nois and tam, that's not really food. So even though the Torah was mechadesh that you have the issa Gid Hanasha by a Gid that's really not nois and tam, but ein locha by el chidusha. If you were makdish now, there'd be no issa, just like there'd be no issa to eat eitzim of hektish, there'd be no issa to eat this Gid because it's not roy lachila, because it's enoi b'nois and tam. So it says the Gemara like this. Maybe when the Mishnah says Gid Hanasha is noyig b'chulam b'mukdashim, the chiddush is as follows. It's going like the mandama that holds yesh begid b'nois and tam. The asi is a mukdashim v'chayla is a Gid. If that's the case, yesh begid b'nois and tam, when you makdish it in addition to the issa Gid Hanasha, maybe there'll be an issa hektish as well. What happened to ein issa chalal issa? Tomorrow's that. But for now, there would be an issa hektish, and maybe that is the chiddush. Meaning the chiddush is not that there's an issa Gid Hanasha when the animal's hektish. The chiddush is that there's an issa hektish on the Gid Hanasha. The fact that there's an issa Gid Hanasha on an animal that's hektish is not a chiddush. Why should what happened to the issa Gid Hanasha? Because it's hektish, the issa Gid Hanasha somehow went away? There's no hamamina to think otherwise. You know what the chiddush is? That there's an issa hektish on the Gid Hanasha. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is yesh begid b'nois and tam. That's the chiddush. Because if ein begid b'nois and tam, and it's a special chiddush that there's an issa achila on the Gid Hanasha, so it would only relate to Gid Hanasha. It wouldn't relate to anything else. So the Gemara says, maybe that's what the Mishnah means. You're right. The Mishnah is not saying a chiddush that there's an issa Gid Hanasha, even though the animal's hektish. It's just the opposite. The Mishnah is saying that there's an issa hektish on the Gid Hanasha. But the Gemara says, if that's what it meant, what's the Lashon HaMishnah? The Lashon HaMishnah is that Gid Hanasha is noyeg ben mukdashim. What the Mishnah should have said, if the chiddush is not that there's an issa Gid Hanasha, but the chiddush is that there's an issa hektish, it should have said mukdashim is noyeg begid. Being that it said Gid Hanasha is noyeg ben mukdashim, it sounds like the chiddush is that there's an issa Gid Hanasha. Elo, the Gemara says, maybe the way you have to understand the Mishnah is differently. The Mishnah really holds ein begid ben noisen tam u ben mukdashim issa Gid ikka issa mukdashim leka. And maybe fakert. You know what the chiddush is? That Gid Hanasha is noyeg ben mukdashim only only the Isser Gid Hanasha is going to be Noy b'Mukdashim, but there won't be an Isser Hektish on the Gid Hanasha because Ein Begidim b'Noisen Tam, and as a result, as it relates to Gid Hanasha, there you have a Chiddush HaTorah. The Torah says you're not allowed to Gid Hanasha. But as it relates to Hektish, we look at it as Eitzim Ba'alma. But the Gemara says that can't be true because for Sava Tana Didan Ein Begidim b'Noisen Tam, does the time of the Mishnah really hold Ein Begidim b'Noisen Tam? The time we learned in the Mishnah, this is the Mishnah that's going to spring board all the sugyas of basav v'chalav and taruvas. It starts with this: if you have a yerach, the thigh of the animal was cooked together with the gid hanasha. What does the Mishnah say? Im yeshba b'noisen tam. If the gid could be noisen tam, if there's a shear harezu asura, then it's going to be asa. Otherwise, not. Now that's clearly implying yesh begid b'noisen tam. Thus, it's maflit blias. As a result, it has an ability to create an issa v'heter, a taruva situation. So you see clearly the time of the Mishnah, albeit a later Mishnah in the parak, holds yesh begid b'noisen tam. If that's true, our Mishnah also has to hold yesh begid. If you hold yesh begidim b'noisen tam, you can't explain the Mishnah ain't begidim b'noisen tam. So again, what's the kasha? If yesh begidim b'noisen tam, then what exactly is the Mishnah saying when it says gid hanasha is noyeh b'mukdashim? To tell me that there's an isser gid hanasha on hektish, that's pshita. To tell me that there's an isser hektish on gid hanasha, that's not pshita, because the chiddush in that is hagufa yesh begidim b'noisen tam. But we shouldn't say that, because then the Mishnah should have said mukdashim is noyeh b'gid hanasha, not gid hanasha is noyeh b'mukdashim. Therefore, the Gemara is going to have a whole arichos to try to figure out exactly what the Mishnah means. That will go into tomorrow's daf, and we'll stop here.